The ongoing utterance of the Spirit confronts His Lordship with your Lordship and allows you to continue to confess that He is Lord. Capiche? Good.
Hello, brothers and sisters. Raven here. Welcome to our next podcast. Today I want to talk about a little clip I threw in at the end of my last video. In case you didn't see it, it was a little discussion. Well, it was a pretty big discussion, actually. I expected it to be something small, but it turned into more. Just talking about part of Ozzy's message during the whole Exodus revival thing. And it was one that really, it was so filthy. His deceit in this goes to a whole nother level, in my opinion. The problem is, everything in this, he keeps contradicting himself constantly. But there's one part that blew my mind that I threw in at the end there of the video after everything else. I don't know how many saw it, because you may have stopped as soon as the main video was done. But he says what I played at the beginning of this, and there's a big problem. And I don't know, I can't say for sure if it's intentional or not. But whether or not it's intentional, I still think this is really how he views it. He says in this that you need to confront God's lordship with your lordship. Now, with what he says here, people would usually make the assumption that he's kind of saying, oh, we have a lordship because God gave it to us because we are his ambassadors. Okay, maybe. I still think you're putting yourself too high to say you have a lordship. But nobody said there. If that's what he was talking about, it should have been you confronting your lordship with his, not confronting his with yours. That's backwards. Now, normally you'd assume, okay, he misspoke. However, he didn't correct himself. And it wasn't like he didn't have a chance to correct himself because he was going through it so fast. No, right after saying this, he stops and he double checks to make sure you understood. He pauses, says, capiche, pauses again, and then says, good, when everybody in the audience responds that they do. If he slipped up like that, and he paused right after, he should have corrected it if he was so concerned to make sure you understood. But he didn't. He kept going. I don't think he misspoke. I think he spoke more honestly than he meant to. See, what this whole thing started off about was this idea of discerning what is really from the Lord and what isn't. This idea that these silent gods, these idols that don't speak, are when you have the wrong God. Think about what this says again. Confront his lordship with your lordship. This is after all these other talks we've looked at before, where they are putting us at the same authority as Jesus and then as God. Then we confront his lordship with ours. What he's talking about here is about this lordship they claim they have, this authority, this title, this position they believe they have been put in, and making sure it's God by whether or not he's giving that authority. Now, you could argue with me that that's not the case because he doesn't come out and say it clearly, but that's the way all of their teaching is. They do their best to keep from coming out and saying it clearly. Problem is, I don't care how you try to take these things. What they say goes against the truth. However you want to try to twist it, it doesn't match what they're saying if you try to make it the truth. And this is the only thing that makes sense to me. Of all the ways I could try to explain what he's saying, this is the one that fits in best with everything else he's saying. This is the only way to try to make these teachings and what he's doing fit together. There's still issues, there's still contradictions, but this fits into his thinking best. Which means, even if this isn't really what he believes, even if this isn't really what he's trying to say, that's the way everybody who's listening is most likely to take it. Whether people mean to or not, whether they care about thinking or not, their minds will almost always rationalize what they want to hold to. So when he's saying things like this, whether they mean to or not, they're going to try to make sense out of it, which means they're most likely to go down this road. Where now, they use their lordship to decide if he has his. It's the same as the way I've had them tell me so many times that you need to have a relationship with the body first. Then you can know God. It's the same thing. Because that's the lordship he's talking about. He's talking about his own. He's not talking about everybody in Homestead having their own lordship. He's talking about that lordship of the community, which is under him, which means it's his. That's why he's a cult leader. But the interesting thing about Homestead, one of the things that's different, is you don't have a single leader anymore. Originally it was Blair. But now you've got a mixture. You've got multiple sons of Blair Adams. You've got primarily Ozzy and Abraham as major leaders. However, Ozzy's the more public one. Abraham's the one who does things more behind closed doors. Then you've got multiple other leaders around them that are pretty much in the same place. You have Wheeler, who definitely speaks up a lot, who definitely teaches quite a bit when he's there. You notice in these sessions, he's one of the ones who's most often standing up and sharing. So there are multiple leaders in this. It's not just one. But what's so disturbing is even in that, I see that in Ozzy. The way he talks, his demeanor, the way he goes about it. It's as though he's still holding himself at the top, even if he isn't. He's treating himself as though he's in that position. He talks as though he's in that position. He's giving himself that authority. So when he says this, confronting his lordship with your lordship, what he really should be saying is confront his lordship with my lordship. Because that's what it works out to within the thinking they have given the people there. Because they are all one body. There are no individuals. All identity has been thrown out for this one identity of this one body. So when he's saying that, he's really pointing at the body, and because he seems to treat himself as the head, he's pointing at himself. Why he's saying this? Because he decides who's God. He's the one who knows. He's the one who's going to tell you. He's the one who's giving you the answers of finding out, is this really God? How do I know if this is God? You talk to him, he'll tell you. It's like many contacts I know have said about Blair when he used to speak a lot. One thing they've told me about, I'd say about 3 different contacts now have told me about this in detail, about meetings they would have where the body would start to have to confess. And individual people would have to get up, confess what they did, and then whether or not they are sort of forgiven would be based on Ozzy's response. Would Ozzy kind of give a little bit of a negative nod and keep repenting or something? Or would he just praise him like, oh, God forgives you, and basically acts like a priest in confession, only a more public confession? That's the kind of position Ozzy's taking here. You have to go to him to find if you're really following God, to find if you're really with the Holy Spirit, to find if you're really forgiven. That's what this is. The leader of a cult. Is there more than one leader in this case? Sure, but that doesn't change the fact that that's what he is. The heresy of Homestead Heritage is so extreme, so dark, and yet somehow stays hidden from its members and from too many who are outside of the cult even. How does something like this stay hidden? Ignorance. There's nothing else. Ozzy just says this so plainly here in this clip I'm showing. And yet people won't hear it that way because they don't want to. They ignore it. They pretend it wasn't said. Yet, whether they admit it or not, by listening to this message, that's ultimately what they're learning. Because every question about what is of the Lord, what is not, they always have to go to the leadership to find out. If you watch the video, one thing Ozzy did at one point in this was he was talking about how it's said to identify who's really of the Lord, and that they call Jesus Lord. And what he did was so weird because he went down this road saying, well, it doesn't mean what we think. It doesn't really mean it so plainly. It's not like that. You got to look at the context. You got to look at it this way. And eventually he just goes and says what everybody's been thinking from the start. He just goes and says what he said it wasn't. What is so weird about it is that what he's doing is he's telling you you're wrong. What you're thinking, what you're assuming is wrong. Then he gives you his reasoning, which doesn't make much sense and isn't much reasoning at all. And then says, but let me tell you what I know is the truth. But he tells you exactly what you just were told not to believe. All he's doing is saying, A isn't true. You're wrong. You're making the wrong assumption. But I've looked at this and I know A is true. He doesn't care so much what you believe. He doesn't really care what you think the truth is. As long as you assume you'll always get the truth from him and you'll not figure it out on your own, he's happy because that's what he wants. He wants to be your God. He is your Lord. This is what he does in so many things. He always tries to take passages, take parts of Scripture, treat as though the way it would be taken normally, the way most take it, the way you'd take it if you just looked at it, says, oh, it's not true, but I know what it really means because I've looked at it right. Here's the way you should take it. And now we've seen him even doing it, where the way most would take it is the way he takes it. And still, it's wrong unless they get it from him. Here's what I find so disturbing. Ozzy, to be honest, is not the one who upsets me most. He is the one who I would say is in a sense the most dangerous. Because he's the one out there attacking, fighting. He's the one out there just deceiving so many people. But imagine what's going on with those people behind the scenes. Abraham, Wheeler, etc. Ozzy is more the voice. He's arrogant, he's proud, envious, stuck up, boastful, etc., etc., etc. But in that sense, he's not hiding himself. Other leaders are. Consider what they do behind the scenes, behind closed doors. That's what makes this really disturbing for me. Because I know Ozzy probably isn't the best when it comes to organizing it. He may be, in a sense, a good motivational speaker, although I would disagree. He does know how to get people's attention. He does know how to motivate. And he's good up there on stage, in a sense. But, again, just by my instinct, I can tell he does not seem like the kind of guy who's really going to be the best at organizing this stuff. His messages are so illogical. They're convincing. Sadly, of so many people. But they're very illogical. They don't make sense. They don't work. Contradict themselves. He's not going to be very good at really organizing stuff. He's only good at persuading people, convincing people. So those who don't do the speaking as much, those who stay more quiet, and I am thinking primarily of Abraham because I've only seen him speak once. What are they doing that we don't know? As we've seen in these messages, Ozzy and others come out and say it, but they always try to make it sound better than it is. And sometimes they'll claim some things that aren't entirely what they teach within their other sessions that are more private, within their own books and things like that. They'll contradict here in this most public of their speeches. Because they're more concerned with the image. And that's what scares me. Once you're talking about what they do behind closed doors, they don't have to worry about that. What do they do then? And from what I've heard and seen, even some leaders don't get to see some of that stuff. It's those secrets, those lies, that can be the worst. And when somebody is vocal, as Ozzy comes out and contradicts himself so blatantly, so obviously, who knows what is being said or taught in those things we never get to look at. What lordship do those men think they have? And if not only does their lordship sit over yours, it confronts God's, consider what kind of lordship that means they're putting over you. What of their own lordship do they use to control you? Let me say, these men want so much power, so much lordship, so much authority, and they are given this authority, but not by God, by you, by their followers, by those who let them take it, by anybody who defends them. sorry to say it, because there's some people I know who do defend them, at least to an extent. And it is so sad to me how blind they are. But that's what they're doing. They're giving these men authority that isn't theirs. I am definitely, once I finally get through this conference, I am definitely going to keep a very close eye on Ozzy, on their sessions on Saturdays. As long as I can, I'm definitely going to be keeping a closer eye on it. Because I can tell he's enjoying this power way too much. Which can mean he might start thinking he's got it so much. He is so strong with this power. It is so much his. He has so much authority. He'll start saying it more openly. He won't hold back. He won't hide it. He'll start losing control of himself and his own arrogance. So I'm definitely going to keep an eye on it. I'll tell you right now, I know some people would kind of be like, why are you saying this? Why are you saying it out loud? He might hear it. He might back off. I don't think so. Ozzy, if you're listening to this, good luck. Almost anybody who's like this, when they see something like this, when they hear something like this, it's not going to make them go and get better at hiding it. It's going to get them upset. It's going to agitate them. It's going to make them quicker to let it out accidentally. It would take a lot, and I mean a whole lot, of self-control to not do that. And that's something I doubt Ozzy has much of. If somehow he does, I'd be impressed. But I don't think so. So don't worry. If you think this is going to put them on the defensive and get them more wrapped up, no. Because to them, if they go on the defensive, it means I won. They won't be able to teach us much of this. Which would mean I won. So no, they're not going to back off. Especially somebody like Ozzy. I'll say it's one thing that I can greatly admire about a lot of Homestead. And I'm talking about the leaders, okay? Because this isn't true about, as we've seen in the past, so many followers. But there's so much self-control within the leadership. There are times we can see they stumble, but they've done much better than most. Because they wouldn't be around this long and they wouldn't be hiding it this well if they didn't have that. At least some of it. And far more than you would normally see of people like this. However, I'm seeing less of that. I think that was mostly in their older leaders, a lot of which have gone now. I think some of the newer leadership is not as good at it. I think things are getting closer to being revealed. I think Blair's passing had a big thing to do with it. Partly because that's what got Ozzy to be speaking as much as he does. But also, they want to hide even more now that they were a cult, which means they have to do even more to make sure people won't get that idea that it's all Ozzy now. Or all Abraham. Or all any particular person. Because that's their best excuse that they're not a cult. So many of those they're bringing in to speak. So many of those that they're having talk, teach. We're seeing that they're not as good at hiding it. Since this has happened, since Blair's been gone, I keep seeing almost every month a little bit more and more slip up. A little more coming out that reveals it better than what we've seen before. And so far, this conference, Even though they're trying to hide it more here and saying more things that aren't completely honest, aren't completely authentic of what they teach, they still are slipping up more here than I've seen before. It's been crazy how many things I've seen Ozzy let out during this conference in comparison to what he's let out in other different sessions online and things like that. I'm curious what he's going to say in the end of this. We've only got a few sessions left, and I think one of them is by him. We'll see as we go. Maybe two by him, but I know one that is not. So we'll see. But I'm really curious how this is going to end. Because hearing him so much, watching him so much, listening so much, I can't help thinking we're going to get to that point where at the end, he's just going to let it out. He's not going to have much time left, and he's just going to start trying to get out everything he can. And because of it, get sloppy. I don't know if he will. That's what I'm kind of hopeful for and kind of scared of. Because if he does, who knows how many videos I might have to do on just the one session. But we'll see what happens. But one thing I want to say before I end this, playing that clip again. Listen to the way he ends this.
The ongoing utterance of the Spirit confronts His Lordship with your Lordship and allows you to continue to confess that He is Lord. Capiche? Good.
By confronting His Lordship with your Lordship, you're able to confess He is Lord. Sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? But is it? No. Because Jesus is now the body to them. What he's talking about here is how now we have his lordship. That's the way he sees it. He's talking about this confession as though confessing lordship you have is the same as lordship he had. And once you see it that way, then you can bow to his lordship. You can now become part of the body. You can now give yourself up and become him. This has nothing to do with giving God lordship, giving Jesus lordship. This is about giving Homestead Heritage lordship. And that's what this whole conference has been. That's what everything they've done has been. From the very start, this was not about giving God lordship. It was about building a community that will take his lordship and make it their own. I'll see you guys next time. God bless.